the mental capacity bill, and also a commitment made by the Minister for the Environment last month to introduce legislation to freeze rent. The mental capacity bill, Taoiseach, Monday was the 8th anniversary of this state signing the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And in the programme for government, you committed to introducing a mental capacity bill that would incorporate this convention into domestic law. Now, 4 years later, that hasn't happened. And there's a whole pile of other legislative matters which have been promised which have not come to the floor of the Dáil. But in the meantime, 156 states have ratified the convention. This state is only one of 3 in the European Union which has failed to do this. And we still rely on the Lunacy Act, 1871. We also have the ongoing difficulties that we see citizens with intellectual disabilities facing in some of these care homes. So, Taoiseach, when will you repeal the disgraceful Lunacy Regulation Act 1871, and when will you introduce a mental capacity bill? And on the other matters, the Minister for the Environment, as I said last month, promised to introduce legislation to freeze rent in the private rental sector for the next 2 years and to tackle excessive rent increases by landlords by the end of this year. So when can we expect this legislation to be published? It's a matter of huge concern. You will know that 500,000 households in our rented accommodation are now approaching the levels that they were paying for rents at the height of the property boom. And in Dublin, rental costs have risen by almost 10%. The Minister also, Ceann Comhairle, expressed concerns at the impact of the programme of reform of local government by Minister Hogan and said that he supported a comprehensive review of the changes which Mr Hogan had forced through. So does the government intend holding a comprehensive review of local government, and when do you intend to do this?
I might say to you, in respect to the mental capacity bill, Ceann Comhairle, that the assisted decision-making capacity bill was published on the 17th of July 2013, and that provides a series of options to support people with impaired capacity to make decisions and to exercise their basic rights in line with the principle of the UN Convention. It undertakes a comprehensive reform of existing legislation governing capacity. Now, that bill is awaiting committee stage here in the House. There are a number of amendments being worked upon. The Government, Deputy Adams, have given a firm commitment to ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the Government intends to proceed to ratification as quickly as is possible. But it is important to clarify, Ceann Comhairle, the process and the issues involved. We have a dualist legal system, and therefore we cannot become party to treaties unless we're first in a position to ratify with the obligations that are imposed upon them, including the amendment of domestic law as is necessary. Now, I'm advised that there are a substantial number of items that need to be dealt with before we can actually deal with that. And the Minister has set up a team in the Department of Justice to examine all of these outstanding matters. That has almost completed the first phase of its work at Ceann Comhairle, and that includes identifying those areas which will need attention prior to ratification being possible. There's an interdepartmental committee in place that met recently to review those issues and the actions and the time frame that are set out to meet with them. So I can advise Deputy Adams that the government is serious here, but because of the dualist system that we have, we've got to deal with a number of issues here before we can ratify. So it's a waiting committee stage. I know, but the bill was only published in 2013, July 2013. And the committee stage is awaited here in the House. There's another key task to Ceann Comhairle that's underway, and that involves examining how the issue of reasonable accommodation can be achieved in a meaningful way within our constitutional framework as interpreted by the Supreme Court. The House may be aware that the Supreme Court, in an Article 26 referral dating in 1998, found that it's unconstitutional to impose an obligation to provide reasonable accommodation to people with disabilities where the cost would be more than a nominal cost. Now, the United Nations requires a higher standard that they call that of a disproportionate cost. So, because our law also on sexual offences imposes a ban on persons with intellectual disabilities having intimate relationships, that needs to be changed while still protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. So the Department of Justice at County Corla is working on proposals to be included in a revised sexual offences criminal law proposal and to put that in a bill to deal with this issue. It has published the discussion paper to allow interested parties to contribute their views on what is a sensitive and very complex matter.
Thank you. Shock of 1871.
Well, the Mental Health Act has recently been completed by an expert group or a review of it. I'll have to give you further advice on that, Deputy Adams.
Thank you. Deputy McNamara.